What is up, YouTube? This is DeFGandolf coming to you with another World of Tanks quick tip. Today, I'm going to be talking about howitzers versus standard weaponry. So, one of the big things I see a lot of players struggle with in the mid tiers, tiers 5, 6, 7, is whether they want to use the howitzers, which are primarily high explosive firing, or the standard armor-piercing firing guns. Now, a prime example of this, if we open the tech tree here, is the M4 Sherman Tier 5 American medium tank. Now, this has always been a big debate since I've been playing the game, whether to use the 76mm gun M1A1 or the 105mm M4 howitzer. Now, I personally used the howitzer through the M4 Sherman and through the M4A3E2 Sherman Jumbo. I used the Derp gun all the way through the Sherman Jumbo, and I even used it over the M1A1 here as the stock gun. Or not as the stock gun, but until I got the 90mm gun on my T20. Now, it really is all down to personal preference whether you want to have the very rapid firing weaponry on the American medium tanks here, or if you want the slower firing but much higher potential damage output of the howitzers. Now, one thing I will say about the howitzer is you do get the option to fire heat, high explosive anti-tank ammunition, which will do very large amounts of damage. And if we look here, your heat shells can do up to 350 damage, and they do have excellent penetration for tier 5 at 101mm. Now, there are plenty of tanks that have higher than that, but 101mm is plenty enough to get through most tanks at this tier. And even at tier 6 on the Sherman Jumbo, that was plenty enough to get through what you needed to shoot through. And 350 damage in tier 5 is enough to one-shot, I'd say probably 75% of the enemies that you will face. And it just does a lot of damage when you fire the premium ammunition. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would you fire the high explosive anti-tank that does 350 damage when you could be firing high explosive that does 410 damage? Great, glad you asked. Now, if you look at the penetration values for the high explosive, it only has 53mm of penetration. Now, at first thought you might go, oh, why do I want to fire that? That'll never damage anything. Well, your first conception is partly true. So, the way high explosive works is if you penetrate the tank you're shooting at, you will do the average damage, which in this case is 410. But if you fail to penetrate the tank, there is an algorithm that the game goes through, and you will do splash damage to the tank even if you don't penetrate. Now, on larger guns, like artillery guns for instance, say take the tier 10 T92 American artillery, its high explosive shells don't even have to hit the tank that you're shooting at to do massive amounts of splash damage to it. But down here at tier 5, you're not going to be splash damaging much unless you hit it. But again, that is a very large advantage to be able to damage enemy tanks that you ordinarily would never be able to pin if you were using the M1A1 gun. Now, the 76mm of this tank with standard ammunition only has 128mm of penetration, which is still fine for tier 5. But if you cannot penetrate a tank that has, say, 150mm of frontal armor, you're never going to be able to damage it with the M1A1 gun. Although, if you're shooting at that same tank with the 105mm Derp gun, you will be able to damage it all the same. Now, you will not be doing the full 410 damage. The penetration that you get through RNG that has an average of 53 on the Derp shell, that is subtracted from the armor value of the tank. And then it goes through an algorithm to see how much damage you will actually roll for. So you can damage tanks with up to over 200mm of armor. You're not going to be doing much damage, but some is better than none in my opinion, and that's why I tended to always use the howitzer on my mid-tier American mediums. Now, another big difference can be seen in the accuracy. If you look at the 76mm gun, it has a dispersion of 0.43 at 100 meters versus 0.55 at 100 meters for the howitzer. That is a massive difference. The howitzer is extremely inaccurate at long range. It's very hard to snipe enemies. Another thing that makes it even harder still to hit enemies at long range is the fact that the shells fired by the howitzer travel extremely slow. So you can have hang times of up to probably 3 to 5 seconds with the shells from the M4 Sherman's howitzer. Now, when I was playing, I played a bit aggressively, maybe even too aggressively for the gun I was using. So I never really had that big of an issue with it. But it can definitely be problematic at long ranges. However, on the 76mm M1A1, you do get enough accuracy to be able to snipe enemies at long range. Maybe not consistently, but you can hit them. Down here at Tier 5, .43 accuracy isn't horrible in comparison to the other medium tanks. The guns are generally inaccurate for the mid-low tier tanks, so .43 accuracy is not horrible. Now another difference that you see here is the aim time. 2.5 seconds versus 2.3 seconds. The non-howitzer gun will almost universally have the better aim time. And that'll just help you when you're, say, jumping around the corner to take a pot shot at an enemy heavy tank. That'll just help you get your shot off faster and get back into cover before they can react. Now, if we were to take a look at a different tank, say, let's look around here. If we were to look at, I don't really have any good examples right here, so let's go to the Russian tech tree. KV-1. KV-1's a good example. So, you have the option of a 122mm howitzer for your top gun, or this 85mm F-30 for your top gun. Now, again, you have the same situation playing out, just on a Russian Tier 5 heavy tank. The penetration on the 85mm standard gun is 120mm, which again isn't horrible, but it's not great. You will have issues with some heavy tanks with around 120mm of penetration at Tier 5. But the average damage is 160, which is pretty good for Tier 5. It's excellent, in fact, for Tier 5. I think the only heavy tank that has more than that at this tier would be the BDR G1, the French Tier 5 heavy tank. And so you will be able to deal a good amount of damage with this gun. However, if you look over here at the 122, you can deal 450 alpha damage with the howitzer and 370 alpha damage with the high explosive anti-tank shells. And the high explosive anti-tank shells, unlike the M4 Sherman, have very nice penetration on this tank with 140mm, which is enough to go through pretty much any Tier 5 tank and most Tier 6 tanks. And the standard high explosive penetration on the 122 is a good 61mm, which at Tier 5 will penetrate a lot more tanks than you would think and do the full 450 damage, meaning that you can one-shot probably 80 to 85% of the tanks in your tier if you aim well. Now, I say if you aim well, but even if you do aim well, with .57 accuracy, you're not guaranteed to hit even in the same zip code as your target. You do end up with just random shots flying around crazily, and since the 9.6 update, that effect is even more relevant. Now, strangely, on this gun, the aim times are the exact same at 2.9 seconds, but again, the standard 85mm gun is much more accurate than the 122. And again, another thing to note is that the travel time for the howitzer, the 122 howitzer, is much, much, much longer than it would be on a standard gun such as the 85. This is a situation that plays out on many tanks in the tech tree. The M4 Sherman and KV-1 are just two good examples of that. And oftentimes, it's all down to personal preference. Very rarely is one of them clearly better than the other for all situations. And it really just depends on how you like to play the tank, whether you like to be sniper, a brawler, or whatever you choose. So if you enjoy this video, please do head over to my channel and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, drop in the comment section below. And yeah, this is DeFGandolf signing off. Later, guys.